Representative of Greece for this statement, and now give the floor representative of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Before coming to the substance of our statement today, I think we need to make an institutional clarification. We note with concern that an attempt is being made to present to the Security Council a supposed representative of civil society, a person whose public career trajectory bears the hallmarks of sustained funding from foreign governments and transnational corporations. This has been the case for years, as well as participation in processes of political destabilization and the promotion of institutional breakdown in her own country. The instrumental use of this person to legitimize narratives of confrontation, justify the use of force, or minimize violations of international law does not contribute in any way to the purposes of this Council or to the strengthening of multilateralism. On the contrary, it erodes the credibility of the debates and distorts the Security Council's mandate entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, on January 3rd, 2026 is a date of profound historical significance, not only for Venezuela, but for the international system as a whole. On that day, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela was the target of an illegitimate armed attack lacking any legal justification by the government of the United States of America, which included bombing of our territory, the loss of civilian and military lives, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, essential infrastructure, and the kidnapping of the constitutional president of the Republic, Nicolas Maduro Moras, and the First Lady Cilia Flores. Venezuela comes before this Council today with a deep conviction that international peace can only be sustained if international law is respected without exception, without double standards, and without selective interpretations. The events of January 3rd constitute a flagrant violation of the UN Charter perpetrated by the US government, in particular, the violation of the principle of sovereign equality of states, of the absolute prohibition of the use or threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, as enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4. And a violation of the duty to settle disputes by peaceful means. Similarly, these acts also seriously violate the Geneva Conventions and its protocols, as indiscriminate attacks were carried out against the civilian population and assets. International human rights law has also been violated, particularly the right to life, personal integrity, and security. Of particular seriousness is the kidnapping of the President of the Republic by the government of the United States of America, which constitutes a direct violation of an essential norm of the international legal order, namely the personal immunity of heads of state in office. This immunity is not an individual privilege. It is an institutional guarantee that protects the sovereignty of states and the stability of the international system. Its disregard not only affects Venezuela, but also sets an extremely dangerous precedent for all states represented in this chamber, regardless of their size, power, or alliances. Mr. President, General Assembly Resolution 3314 clearly defines as an act of aggression the bombing of the territory of one state by the armed forces of another state, as well as the invasion or occupation, even without formal annexation. The events we are denouncing here unequivocally fit this definition. In 2004, the International Court of Justice affirmed that occupation exists when a state exercises effective control, even without formal annexation or the continuous presence of troops. Security Council Resolution 242, for its part, emphasizes that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible, while General Assembly Resolution 2625 establishes that the territory of a state shall not be subject to military occupation as a result of the use of force in contravention of the UN Charter. Allowing such acts to go without an effective answer would amount to normalizing the replacement of law by might, while eroding the very foundations of the collective security system. Today, it is not only Venezuela's sovereignty that is at stake, the credibility of international law, the authority of this organization, and the validity of the principle that no state can set itself up as a judge, party, and executor of the world order are also at stake. Mr. President, we cannot ignore a central element of this US aggression. Venezuela is the victim of these attacks because of its natural resources. Our country's oil, energy, strategic resources, and geopolitical position have historically been factors of greed and external pressure. When force is used to control resources, impose governments, or redesign states, we are faced with a logic that harks back to the worst practices of colonialism and neocolonialism. Accepting such a logic would mean to open the door to a deeply unstable world in which countries with greater military capacities can decide by force the political and economic destinies of other states. This scenario not only threatens Venezuela, it threatens international peace and security as a whole. If the kidnapping of a head of state, the bombing of a sovereign country, and the open threat of further armed action are tolerated or downplayed, the message sent to the world is a devastating one, namely that the law is optional and that force is the true arbiter of international relations. Venezuela firmly believes in diplomacy, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence among nations. That has always been our historical position, and it remains so today, even in the face of an aggression of this magnitude. It is precisely that commitment to peace, the one that was violated on the 3rd of January. Therefore, Venezuela urges this Security Council to fully assume its responsibility and to act in accordance with the mandate conferred upon it by the Charter of the United Nations. In that regard, we request, A, that the government of the United States of America be demanded to fully respect the immunities of President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores, as well as their immediate release and safe return to Venezuela. 2, that the use of force against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela be clearly and unequivocally condemned. Thirdly, that the principle of non-acquisition of territory affirmed. And 4, that measures aimed at de-escalation, the protection of the civilian population, and the restoration of international law be adopted. Mr. President, to inform this body and the international community effective control over all of its territory. In accordance with our Constitution, Executive Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is being sworn in as acting President of the Republic, thereby guaranteeing institutional continuity, stability, and internal peace. We wish to convey a message of serenity, confidence, and hope to the Venezuelan people. Venezuela is a nation that believes in peace, work, and dignity. Our commitment is to diplomacy and law, and the law is firm and unwavering. We defend our sovereignty without renouncing our values. We bet on dialogue without accepting imposition. We believe in a future of coexistence, development, and mutual respect among nations. We trust that this Security Council will rise to the historic moment facing humanity and choose the path of legality, collective responsibility, and peace. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and now give the floor to the representative of Argentina.
Buenos días.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the government of the Argentine Republic values the decision and determination demonstrated by the President of the United States of America and by his government in the recent actions taken in Venezuela that resulted in the capture of the dictator Nicolas Maduro, leader of the Cartel of the Suns, declared a terrorist organization by Argentina in 2025, the same year in which Argentina also declared the Tren de Aragua a terrorist organization. The Argentine Republic trusts that these events represent a decisive step forward against narco-terrorism that affects the region, and at the same time open a stage that will allow the Venezuelan people to fully recover democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, in accordance with the principles of international law, and put an end to the oppression exercised for years by the authoritarian regime that plunged the Venezuelan people into poverty and forced 8 million Venezuelans to have to flee their country. Mr. President, the illegitimate regime of Nicolas Maduro has not only constituted a direct threat to Venezuelan citizens through the systematic violation of human rights, the appropriation of the country's resources, and the destruction of democratic institutions, but also to the entire region by leading and exporting its networks of drug trafficking and organized crime. Since the inauguration of President Javier Milei, Argentina has been clear and consistent in its position regarding this situation. We have unequivocally denounced the lack of freedoms and the serious human rights violations, and we have actively contributed with the determination and responsibility to international efforts aimed at the return of democracy in Venezuela. In March 2024, when others opted for inaction or ambiguity, Argentina granted diplomatic asylum to 6 Venezuelan opposition leaders, assuming an enormous challenge for our representation in Caracas. Subsequently, after denouncing the fraudulent nature of the result announced in the 28 July 2024 elections and recognizing Edmundo González Urrutia as president-elect, Argentina was expelled from Venezuela. Our embassy, where the asylum seekers remained, was subject to a permanent siege. Despite these pressures, the Argentine Republic maintained its unwavering conviction to continue denouncing the situation in Venezuela and to act in every available international forum so that Venezuela could once again embrace freedom and democracy. Mr. President, this is not the first time that Argentina has addressed this Security Council regarding the situation in Venezuela. On the 23rd of December last, we expressed our deep concern over institutional and humanitarian deteriorating situation, noting the effects of the illegitimate regime of Nicolas Maduro transcended the domestic sphere and negatively affected regional stability, constituting a concrete threat to hemispheric security. In the same vein, President Milei stated at the Mercosur summit that Argentina welcomed the pressure from the United States aimed at freeing the Venezuelan people. Today, the international community faces a new scenario that poses a dual challenge: to support a genuine democratic transition in Venezuela and to contribute to the lasting restoration of peace and security in our region. Faced with both challenges, the Argentine Republic stands ready and willing to cooperate. We reaffirm our firm commitment to the full restoration of institutional normalcy and the rule of law in Venezuela, always safeguarding the freedom, human dignity, and prosperity of the brotherly Venezuelan people, as well as our determination to continue fighting against the scourge of narco-terrorism and those who contribute to its financing. The process that begins today requires the firm and coordinated commitment of all those countries that have accompany the Venezuelan people in their long struggle so that Venezuela can leave behind more than 2 decades of political, humanitarian, and social crisis and can finally be reunited with freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, and economic prosperity. Mr. President, finally, the Argentine Republic requests that the authorities responsible for administering the transition in Venezuela contribute to the immediate release of the Argentine citizen Nahuel Gallo, who has been in a situation of enforced disappearance since the 8th of December 2024, in clear violation of his human rights, and that his prompt and safe return to our country be guaranteed. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Argentina and now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chile would like to thank Somalia for convening this informational briefing under the item Threats to International Peace and Security. We'd also like to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, USG for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, as well as the briefings from Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas. President, Chile would like to express our deep concern and firm condemnation of the unilateral military action taken by the United States in the territory of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We also reiterate consistently our firm commitment to respect for international law, sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the threat or the use of the threat of force, and full respect for human rights. These affirmations are accepted by the majority, and they must maintain their importance in order to preserve international peace and security. We said this on the 23rd of December when we took the floor, and we reiterate this today. Chile does not recognize the Maduro regime, but serious violations of human rights being faced by Venezuela do not have a military solution. They can only be addressed through peaceful, gradual, and inclusive measures that will take into account the legitimate aspirations of the Venezuelan people. Respect for international law does not allow for exceptions, including when it comes to addressing the illegitimacy of a president. Problems must always be solved within the normative framework that we have provided for ourselves as nations. The future of Venezuela must include free elections, citizen participation, and international assistance, and not with actions that could create dangerous precedents or escalate tensions in the region with serious consequences for the population. Chile, as a witness of history and based on our own experience with the loss of democracy, where there was foreign interference that caused extreme damage and pain for the Chilean people, we were able to recover our democracy through a transitional process that was carried out with the assistance of the international community, the strength of organized citizens, and through our institutions. Mr. President, Chile would like also to underscore the urgent need to continue with coordinated efforts multilaterally to address transnational organized crime. And we're also convinced that Latin America and the Caribbean must continue to be a zone of peace, because that zone of peace not only serves Latin America and the Caribbean, but the entire world. An armed conflict will have devastating humanitarian consequences in Venezuela and in the region. It will worsen the suffering of the civilian population and worsen even further the displacement, insecurity, and vulnerability aspects of the situation. We reiterate that any differences must be dealt with exclusively through peaceful means in strict respect for international law, the sovereignty of states, and the prohibition of the use or the threat of the use of force. As was recently indicated by the heads of state of Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain, we express our concern with regard to any attempt to control government administration or foreign ownership of strategic assets. This would be against international law and would threaten the political, economic, and social stability of the region. Mr. President, Given this complex scenario, Chile welcomes the role that could be played by multilateral fora. And here, particularly, we would refer to the role of the United Nations, and particularly the role that could be played by the Secretary General and by this Council, with the consent of the parties involved to contribute to de-escalating the situation and searching for an understanding that would favor a peaceful and lasting exit to the crisis. Prudent leadership and experience of our organization, as well as the regional organizations and mechanisms, could be very relevant to avoid a further worsening of the situation and to keep open the channels of communication. Chile reiterates its preparedness to support constructive initiatives that will point in this direction and work together with countries of the region and with the international community for stability and mutual understanding and respect for the principles that underpin this organization. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement and now give the floor to the representatives of Brazil.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, we'd like to thank Somalia for convening this emergency session of the Security Council. Brazil categorically and firmly rejects the armed intervention in Venezuelan territory in flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and of international law. The bombings on Venezuelan territory and the capture of its president cross an unacceptable line. These acts constitute a very serious affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela and set an extremely dangerous precedent for the entire international community. The Charter of the United Nations establishes as a pillar of the international order the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, except in the circumstances strictly provided for therein. The acceptance of actions of this nature would inexorably lead to a scenario marked by violence, disorder, and the erosion of multilateralism to the detriment of international law and institutions. The effects of the weakening of international governance and cooperation mechanisms are already evident. The record number since the Second World War of 61 active armed conflicts, the unprecedented figure of 117 million people in situations of humanitarian disaster around the world, reflecting the increase in wars, displacement, and crimes against humanity, such as the genocide in Gaza, and the global increase in military spending, which is approaching the historical mark of $2.7 trillion. As Brazil has reiterated on numerous occasions, the norms that govern coexistence among states are mandatory and universal. They do not admit exceptions based on ideological, geopolitical, political, economic, or any other kind of interests or projects. They do not admit that the exploitation of natural or economic resources justifies the use of force or the illegal change of a government. The multipolar world of the 21st century, which promotes peace and prosperity, must not be confused with spheres of influence. We cannot accept the argument that the end justifies the means. This reasoning lacks legitimacy and opens the possibility of granting the strongest the right to define what is just or unjust, what is right or wrong, and even to ignore national sovereignties, imposing the decisions to be taken by the weakest. Latin America and the Caribbean have made peace a conscious, lasting, and irreversible choice. The resort to force in our region evokes chapters of history that we believed we'd left behind us and endangers the collective effort to preserve the region as a zone of peace and cooperation, free of armed conflicts, respectful of international law and the principle of non-intervention. Armed interventions in the past have had profoundly negative and lasting consequences. Contrary to freedom and democracy, those interventions produced authoritarian regimes and serious violations of human rights, leaving as a lamentable result thousands of dead, political prisoners, tortured persons and disappeared persons whose families still today search for their loved ones, as well as justice and reparation. For the first time in South America, a profoundly alarming event has occurred. An external armed aggression with the deployment of troops and bombings in a neighboring country contiguous with Brazil, with which we share more than 2,000 kilometers of border. Mr. President, South America is a zone of peace. I insist upon that. We have upheld and will uphold with full determination peace and non-intervention in our region. Furthermore, Brazil does not believe that the solution to the situation in Venezuela lies in the creation of protectorates in the country, but rather in solutions that respect the self-determination of the Venezuelan people within the framework of its constitution. The events of January 3rd transcend the regional sphere. The attack on the sovereignty of any country, regardless of the direction of its government, affects the entire international community. This and other cases of armed intervention against the sovereignty of a country, its territorial integrity, or its institutions must be vehemently condemned. It is up to this Council to assume its responsibility and react with determination, clarity, and obedience to international law in order to prevent the law of force from prevailing over the force of law. Brazil trusts that the future of Venezuela will be built by the Venezuelan people through dialogue, without external interference, and within the framework of international law. Thank you.
For Brazil, for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, thank you for having convened this emergency meeting of the Council. The government of Mexico has already made its position clear with regard to our condemnation of the military aggression of January 3rd against targets in the territory of Venezuela, in clear violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. These actions must not be allowed, as they constitute a severe blow to the Charter and to multilateralism. Mexico would like to clarify the following points. 4 points. Number one, the prohibition of the threat or the use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of any state is the foundation of international law, regardless of the country or the government involved. 2, rhetoric pointing towards the escalation or expansion of military actions, including to other countries in our region, threatens regional stability. 3, the Security Council has the responsibility and, above all, it has the obligation to act decisively and without double standards in the face of serious violations of the Charter, and to restore international peace and security in strict adherence to the provisions of Article 24 and observing Article 27.3. 4, it is for sovereign peoples to decide their destiny and to find peaceful, democratic, and negotiated solutions to their political differences within a framework of unrestricted respect for human rights. Regime change by external actors and the application of extraterritorial measures are not only acts contrary to international law, but historically, all they've done is exacerbate conflicts and weakened the social and political fabric of nations. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, Despite the political differences among our governments, Latin America and the Caribbean has been forged as a zone of peace. Collectively, we have, for decades now, resorted to the available political and legal mechanisms available in order to peacefully settle disputes. The current violation of this fragile balance gravely endangers the political stability and the security of the region, as well as the well-being of our peoples. Those who justify these acts deny the independent history of Latin America and the Caribbean. Mexico, firm in its constitutional principles of foreign policy and its pacifist calling, emphatically reiterates that dialogue and negotiation are the only legitimate and effective ways to resolve existing differences. I reiterate the call of the President of Mexico for the UN to do more to resolve this and other conflicts, including through the good offices of its Secretary General. In view of the events of January 3rd, Mexico reaffirms its willingness to support any effort at facilitating dialogue, mediation, or providing assistance that promotes peace in the region. Finally, we cannot overlook the fact that this session of the Council has been held only now, when what we face is a serious situation that puts international peace and security at risk. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Paraguay.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation of Paraguay would like to thank the presidency and the members of the council for the opportunity to take the floor at this very important session. Paraguay has already pointed out the situation with regard to Venezuela under President Maduro and the Cartel de los Soles and the criminal organization that was formally declared as such by our national authorities, and his continued presence was a threat to the region. The exit of the leader of that terrorist organization should immediately lead to the restoration of democracy and to the rule of law in Venezuela, making it possible for the popular will expressed at the ballot box will be the foundation for reconstruction in Venezuela. We would also urgently call for the release of all political prisoners that are still in the prisons of that country. And we reiterate that a return to democratic institutions in Venezuela and the possibility for the legitimately elected authorities to resume their functions are fundamental steps for stability in the region. And finally, Paraguay reaffirms our historic commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes, and we would observe the current events in Venezuela, and we would urge democratic means to be given priority for an ordered transition. Our commitment will continue to be to the democratic principles of the rule of law and peace in society. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Paraguay for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Cuba.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Cuba aligns itself with the statement to be delivered by Eritrea on behalf of the group of friends of the United Nations and Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Since September of last year, Cuba has been denouncing the hegemonic and criminal plans of the United States and its aggressive projection against Venezuela and the region. We have clearly been exposed to the serious and unpredictable consequences of the irresponsible conduct of the US government for the political, social, and economic stability of Latin America and the Caribbean, and more generally, for international peace and stability. On the 23rd of December, in this very body, we set out the sequence and escalation of actions carried out by the United States with the aim of overthrowing by force the legitimate and constitutional government of Venezuela and destroying the civic military union. The United States resorted to various maneuvers to materialize its plans for domination, including vile extrajudicial executions and acts of piracy, maritime terrorism against oil tankers and their crews in international waters of the Caribbean Sea, as well as the imposition of an illegal naval blockade against Venezuela and the politically motivated designation of its legitimate government as a foreign terrorist organization. Previously, it had subjected that country to prolonged unilateral coercive measures, economic asphyxiation, smear campaigns, and attacks against some of its important institutions, exposing it to a cruel psychological war. With absolute disrespect for the Charter of the United Nations and international law, including relevant resolutions adopted by this Council and by the General Assembly, on January the 3rd, United States military forces attacked Venezuela with total brutality and treachery, and in an unacceptable and barbaric act kidnapped its legitimate president, Nicolas Maduro, and his companion, Celia Flores. Cuba condemns in the strongest terms the military aggression of the United States against Venezuela, while categorically reiterating its absolute support and solidarity with the Venezuelan people, and joins the demand that the government of the United States release the constitutional president, Nicolas Maduro Moros, and his companion, Celia Flores. In the criminal attack perpetrated by the United States, 32 Cubans lost their lives in combat actions. They were carrying out missions on behalf of the Revolutionary Armed Forces and the Ministry of the Interior at the request of counterpart bodies of that country. Our compatriots honorably fulfilled their duty and fell after fierce resistance in direct combat against the attackers or as a result of the bombings of the facilities. Through their heroic actions, they upheld the solidarity sentiments of millions of our compatriots. Mr. President, the cowardly US aggression against Venezuela is a criminal act in violation of international law and the UN Charter. It constitutes a dangerous escalation of the sustained war campaign waged for years by the United States against that sister nation, which intensified since September 2025 with the aggressive naval deployment in the Caribbean Sea under mendacious pretexts and unfounded accusations without any evidence whatsoever. The US military attack against Venezuela has no justification whatsoever. It does not respond to any provocation, nor does it possess legitimacy. It is based on the aberrant doctrine of peace through force and undermines the stability and peace that have characterized our Latin American and Caribbean region for years. It seeks to promote a change in the constitutional order of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, freely chosen by its people. Its ultimate objective is not the false narrative of combating drug trafficking, but control over Venezuela's land and natural resources, as has been openly and shamelessly declared by President Trump and his Secretary of State. This is an imperialist and fascist aggression with objectives of domination that seeks to revive the US hegemonic ambitions over our America, anchored in the outdated Monroe Doctrine. It also seeks to intimidate and subjugate the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean. Cuba calls for an urgent reaction from the international community against this criminal attack on Venezuela, a peaceful nation that has not attacked the United States or any other country. We call on all governments, parliaments, social movements, and peoples of the world to condemn the US military aggression against Venezuela and to confront this act of state terrorism that threatens international peace and security and seeks to impose a new doctrine of US imperialist domination in Latin America and the Caribbean and in the world. Mr. President, the recent statements about imperialist plans to steer Venezuela toward a supposed safe, appropriate, and prudent transition are totally unacceptable. In the US vision of domination, this means imposing a puppet government functional to its predatory goals, particularly unrestricted access to and plundering of natural resources that, by right, belong to the Venezuelan people. Determining the destiny of Venezuela is an exclusive right of its people without external interference. If the US government, lacking any moral authority whatsoever, truly cared about the peace, freedom, and justice of Venezuelan men and women, it would not have bombed that territory with absolute disregard for the lives, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of that nation. I conclude by reaffirming our unwavering adherence to the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, and by calling for action with the firmness and determination that current circumstances demand, always in defense of international law and of a future of peace for all the peoples of our America and of the world. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Cuba for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone of peace, declared by the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, on behalf of all of the peoples and governments of our region. This zone of peace must be fully respected by all governments of the world without exception, and in particular by the members of this Security Council responsible for international peace and security. This decision, these desires and aspirations of our peoples, are a noble contribution to world peace, to international law, and to the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, Nicaragua supports what was expressed by the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, calling for the immediate release of the constitutional and legitimate president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro Moros, and the first fighter of the country, Cilia Flores. All member states of the United Nations have the duty to respect international law, the spirit, the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, the right to sovereignty, self-determination, territorial integrity of states, non-interference, and peaceful coexistence. The Venezuelan people are a dignified people, the people of Bolivar, of Chavez, and of Maduro, and they have never bowed the knee. They defend their right to sovereignty and their right to peace. Nicaragua will always stand with Venezuela. Peace has been deeply damaged, and the human family, the community of nations, the peoples of the world. We urge all of you to respect the dignity of all peoples. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Nicaragua for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago thanks the Security Council for convening this urgent meeting following the recent developments in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. My delegation addresses this council today as a Caribbean nation, a neighbor of Venezuela, and a long-standing advocate for peaceful coexistence and the rule of law. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has taken note of the military operations undertaken by the United States in Venezuela. We remain committed to cooperative efforts led by the United States to disrupt and dismantle networks that enable transnational crime across the Americas, whose activities have had debilitating effects on the security and stability of the region. Trinidad and Tobago remains steadfast in its support of the United States of America's initiatives that strengthen regional security, reinforce the rule of law, and safeguard the well-being of our societies, the Americas. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, while valuing its long-standing and robust partnership with the United States, remains equally committed to maintaining a constructive and respectful relationship with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and continues to uphold peaceful relations with the people of Venezuela. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago wishes to underscore its long-standing relationship with both the United States and Venezuela and stands ready to work collaboratively with all partners who share the aspiration of a safer, more prosperous and stable hemisphere. Mr. President, I thank you.
I thank the representative of Trinidad and Tobago and now give the floor to the representative of Spain.
Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to congratulate you on assuming the monthly presidency of the United Nations Security Council and wish you every success in the discharge of your duties. I thank you for convening this important meeting, and I also extend my thanks to the Undersecretary General and Head of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs of the United Nations, Madam Rosemary DiCarlo. Thank her for the information provided today. Spain would like to express our profound concern about what's happened in Venezuela. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations has noted, it constitutes a very worrying precedent with implications for the region and for the world. Respect for the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, particularly the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and the prohibition of the use or the threat of use of force, is indispensable to ensure international coexistence. Spain defends the validity of an international order that is rules-based, where it is imperative, as set out in Article 2.3 of the Charter, to pursue the peaceful settlement of disputes. We consider that these actions constitute a very troubling precedent for regional peace and security, and we recall that the natural resources of a country are part of its sovereignty. We share the view that the fight against organized crime in the region is a priority, but that fight can only be waged through international cooperation. We also share the view that it is a priority to defend human rights and fundamental freedoms in Venezuela. Spain seeks to work for peace, stability, democracy, progress, and social justice, and that cannot be imposed by force. It can only come through broad dialogue among Venezuelans, leading to a peaceful and democratic Venezuelan solution. It must be the voice of the Venezuelan people that determines the destiny of Venezuela. Spain did not recognize the results of the most recent elections held in Venezuela in July 2024 and has been unequivocal in condemning any violations and threats to human rights. We have provided protection to opposition leaders who have been persecuted and have expressed firm rejection of any undemocratic conduct and abuses against the citizenry, but such condemnation can only be exercised with full respect for international law. Spain will work to unite Venezuelans, men and women, and is committed to dialogue and peace because force never brings more democracy. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Spain, and I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. We wish to congratulate the Federal Republic of Somalia for assuming the rotating presidency of the United Nations Security Council for the month of January, and wish you and your delegation all the best in the execution of your responsibilities. We also wish to thank you for convening this debate and affording all UN member states to participate because the situation in Venezuela concerns all UN member states, given its implications for the credibility of the UN Charter and international law. Mr. President, integral to the maintenance of international peace and security since the establishment of the United Nations is the understanding that no nation can claim to be legally or morally superior to another. We are all nations born out of different histories and contexts, ascribing to the common values and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Chief amongst these principles is the sovereign equality of all its members. By signing the Charter, we have all committed to settle our international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace, security, and justice are not endangered. We have also committed to refrain in our foreign relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. The International Court of Justice has also previously affirmed that international law prohibits the use of force and intervention in another state's affairs. Due to the shortcomings of its predecessor, the League of Nations, the UN was created to prevent countries from resorting to conflict, to settle disputes and prohibit the use of force unless it is done in a legally prescribed manner. In doing so, the UN has played a pivotal role in ensuring peaceful existence amongst nations, including in ending the colonial subjugation by powerful countries over others, underpinned by respect for the equal rights of nations, large and small, and respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Joining the organization and committing to its principles afforded protection to many of us, with the supposed assurance that no longer would one nation be seen as inferior to another. Unfortunately, when countries ignore the Charter and act contrary to its central premise, it undermines the credibility of the entire system in which we all undertake our international relations. The stability of the international system depends not only on the respect, but on the consistent application of these established legal norms. We all benefit from a rules-based international order based on international law. When we break those norms, we invite anarchy and an environment where might makes right, ignoring the complexity of interrelations and interdependence in our modern world. Mr. President, the unilateral military strikes carried out by the United States of America against Venezuela and the abduction of President Nicolas Maduro and his spouse from Venezuelan territory for transfer to the United States wantonly violates the sovereignty and territorial integrity and independence of Venezuela. These actions are also in stark contrast to our established legal norms, reinforcing the belief that might is right and undermining diplomacy. History has repeatedly demonstrated that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepen crises. Unlawful unilateral force of this nature undermines the stability of the international order and the principle of equality among nations. Such use of force also undermines the institutional infrastructure established to regulate relations among nations. We have seen examples of these in Libya, Iraq, and countless cases in Africa, where foreign interventions and interference create security crises and undermine national governance institutions cultivated through nuanced and complex national contexts. South Africa stresses that allegations of internal governance challenges, human rights concerns, or acts of criminality by a head of state cannot justify a breach of the Charter's prohibition on the use of force, particularly Article 2.4 of the Charter. The peaceful resolution of disputes and internal matters must proceed in accordance with international law and through multilateral mechanisms. Additionally, under international law, a state has exclusive jurisdiction over persons and conduct within its own territory. Any enforcement of domestic law, including arrest by one state within the territory of another state without the state's consent, is an unlawful violation of sovereignty. There are recourse mechanisms at the disposal of states to implement international law. This includes taking action by bringing a case before the International Court of Justice or seeking action from the Security Council. We note the statement issued by a group of concerned countries, mainly those in the Latin American region, most affected by the developments in Venezuela, which reiterates that the situation in Venezuela must be resolved exclusively through peaceful means, through dialogue, negotiation, and respect for the will of the Venezuelan people in all its expressions, without external interference and in accordance with international law. Mr. President, each one of our countries, including our peoples that are members of this organization and that are bound to its charters, have the right to determine our own democratic and political path. This inherent charter-given right to self-determination cannot and should not be abrogated. If we do not stand up for the sovereign rights of any nations or states when they are undermined and wantonly violated, then which one of us are safe or are guaranteed protection by the principles of the Charter and international law? Failure to act decisively against such violations is a tantamount to inviting anarchy and normalizing the use of force and military might as the main form of discourse in international politics. This would be a regression into a world preceding the United Nations, a world that gave us two brutal world wars, and an international system prone to severe structural instability and lawlessness. We cannot afford to proceed into a complex future without the stability and protection afforded by international law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the onset to congratulate Your Excellency and the government of the Federal Republic of Somalia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of January. We also extend our congratulations to Bahrain, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, and Latvia on their election to the Security Council. As this is the first Security Council meeting of the year, allow me to pay tribute to the outgoing members, Algeria, Guyana, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, and Slovenia, for their dedicated service and diligent work throughout the tenure of the Council. I read this statement on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter. The Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations condemns the most unequivocal and categoric manner the act of aggression perpetrated on 3rd January 2026 against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by special forces of the United States of America, which included armed attacks against civilian and military objects in the capital city of Caracas, as well as in various other cities of the Venezuelan territory, and the illegal abduction of the President and First Lady of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, His Excellency Mr. Nicolas Maduro Moros, and Her Excellency Mrs. Celia Flores de Maduro. The member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations expressed their serious concern at the impact of these series of armed attacks, particularly on civilians and their human rights to life, which have included military assaults with U.S. Special Forces, while emphasizing that such acts constitute a clear breach of international law and of each and every principle governing international relations, including those foreseen in the Charter of the United Nations. The Group of Friends of the Charter of the United Nations reiterates its firm support to the constitutional government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela under the leadership of President Nicolas Maduro Moros, and emphasize the importance of ensuring strict respect for the inviolability of the immunities accorded to heads of states and government under international law, while renewing its unwavering solidarity with the Venezuelan people in their ongoing struggle for defending their homeland, including through the actions it may take within the framework of international law to exercise its inalienable right to self-defense. The member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations demand for the immediate cessation of all hostilities against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, for the full respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and inalienable right to self-determination of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, for the immediate return of President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores de Maduro to the Venezuelan national territory, and for those responsible for these acts of aggression to be held accountable. The Group of Friends of the Charter of the United Nations firmly reject the remarks delivered by the President of the United States of America during the afternoon of 3rd January 2026, in which he not only threatened with additional airstrikes against the Venezuelan territory, but also claimed to resolve to occupy and govern the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and to exploit the natural resources and administer the wealth of that sisterly nation in what can only be described as the confession of a clear plan of annexation that foresees, among others, the complete obliteration of the inalienable rights of the Venezuelan people, as well as the fundamental rights of the Venezuelan state as a whole. The member states of the Group of Friends of the Defense of the Charter of the United Nations call on all relevant international bodies, including the Security Council and the General Assembly of the United Nations, to swiftly mobilize in order to uphold the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and to urgently take appropriate measures to avoid further escalation of the situation on the ground, particularly additional acts of aggression against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and preserve both regional and international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Eritrea for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency and important meeting. We acknowledge the presence of the Undersecretary General, Mr. Carlo, at this meeting and extend our appreciation to Professor Jeffrey Sachs for his informative and insightful briefing. At the outset, I would like to extend my warm congratulations to Somalia on its assumption of the presidency of the Security Council for this month. I also wish to warmly congratulate the newly elected members of the Council, Bahrain, Colombia, Republic of Congo, Latvia, and Liberia on their election. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran would like to associate itself with the statement delivered by Eritrea on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations and wishes to make the following remarks in its national capacity. First, the Islamic Republic of Iran condemns in the strongest possible terms the military attack carried out by the United States of America against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This illegal act constitutes a state terrorism, a manifest violation of Charter of the United Nations, particularly Article 2, Section 4 and Section 7, and peremptory norms of the international law and amounts to an internationally wrongful act and a full-fledged act of aggression. Such military aggression against an independent member state of the United Nations establishes a serious breach of regional and international peace and security with far-reaching consequences for the international system as a whole. Second, the abduction of democratically elected president and the First Lady of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by the United States constitute a flagrant violation of customary international law, including the principles of the inviolability of the immunities accorded to the heads of a state and government under international law, and represent a grave assault on the sovereign equality of states. The Islamic Republic of Iran recalls Venezuela's inherent right to self-defense and underscores the legal responsibility of the United Nations, in particular the Security Council, to take immediate measures to halt this unlawful aggression and to ensure accountability for all those responsible. Iran also affirms its full support for the people and legitimate the elected government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Third, the United States is openly seeking to substitute its domestic law for international law and the Charter of the United Nations. This represents a serious warning to the international community and to all member states. Such unlawful conduct strikes at the very foundations of the Charter-based international legal order and establishes a dangerous precedent that must be categorically and unequivocally rejected. The so-called declared U.S. policy of peace through strength prescribe the law of the jungle and the rule of force instead of rule of law, and if tolerated and normalized, would render the collective security system established by the Charter ineffective and devoid of purpose. Fourth, the continued inaction and paralysis of the Security Council in the face of the explicit threat and act of aggression by the United States have fostered a dangerous climate of impunity. It has emboldened the United States to persist in unlawful conduct that poses a grave threat to regional and international peace and security. In recent days, the President of the United States has repeatedly issued public threat of the use of force against the Islamic Republic of Iran in manifest violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. At the same time, the United States is shedding crocodile tears for the Iranian people and hypocritically claims to support them while maintaining a well-documented record of intervention, the use of force, and the imposition of unlawful unilateral coercive measures against Iran. This includes its direct political, military, and operational support and involvement for Israeli regime unlawful joint war of aggression against Iran between 13 and 24 June 2025, which resulted in loss of civilian life, attacks on civilian infrastructure, and serious violations of fundamental human rights of the Iranian people. Iran reaffirms its inherent right to defend its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national security, and to protect its people against any foreign interference. The United States of America will bear full responsibility for consequences arising from its unlawful threats and any ensuing escalation. Finally, we unequivocally reject the baseless allegation and unwarranted reference made to Iran by the representative of the United States at this meeting. The facts on the ground are clear, speak loudly for themselves, and cannot be concealed by political rhetoric or manufactured narrative. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Islamic Republic of Iran and now give the floor to the representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, representing 121 member states united by the shared principle of respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, categorically condemns the act of aggression perpetuated by the United States of America against the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela since the early hours of 3rd January 2026, which included armed attacks against civilian and military locations in the capital city of Caracas, as well as in various other cities of the Venezuelan territory. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement notes that attacks in question, which blatantly violate the purposes and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, as well as the norms of the international law, constitute an act of war against the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela that undermines both regional and international peace, security, and stability, while also threatening the very right to life of the Venezuelan people. Excuse me. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement demands the immediate cessation of all hostilities against the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela, the full respect of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and inalienable rights to the self-determination of Bolivian Republic of Venezuela, and that those responsible for those ongoing acts of aggression to be held accountable. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement reaffirms the inviolability of the immunities accorded to the heads of states and government under international law, which constitute a fundamental pillar of sovereign equality, peace, coexistence, and stable international relations. These immunities, firmly rooted in customary international law and consistent with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, must be respected universally without discrimination, and any actions or measures that undermine or selectively disregard them risk eroding multilateralism destabilizing international relations and weakening the international legal order. Excuse me. Mr. President, the Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement reiterates its full solidarity with the people and government of the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela at this critical time and insists that military solutions are not viable avenues for addressing any issues that may be of concern between members of the international community. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uganda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Cuba, who has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my delegation feels it must take the floor again to respond to the unfounded accusations formulated by the United States against Cuba. We are indignant that those that have led unilateral aggressions and systematic violations of international law pretend to judge other sovereign states with a totally immoral and irresponsible attitude lacking respect. We fundamentally reject the accusations that Cuba has intelligence assets in Venezuela. These kinds of statements lack any factual base and are a clear attempt to take the eyes of the world off the criminal acts of the United States in the region. Cuba strictly respects the sovereignty, independence, and inalienable right of the Venezuelan people to decide their own destiny, as established by the United Nations Charter. Cooperation between both countries is in multiple spheres, has legitimate bases, and is based on bilateral agreements signed by both parties. As has been declared by the revolutionary government, the 32 combatants that fell in terrorist acts perpetrated by the United States were in missions of the revolutionary forces at the request of Venezuela. Those patriots were heroic in their action, showing solidarity with millions of Cubans. These accusations attempt to suggest that Cuba is involved in this way in Venezuela. We categorically reject that. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Cuba for the statement. There is no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.